Well, welcome everybody to my personal third and final presentation for this expo. I've done a couple of them. If you haven't seen, I've done the intro to scheduling, which was last Friday, last Friday, and then 2 nights ago, of course, I was on here with my buddy Eli, and we did our Order Minnesota trip presentation. Today, though, what we're going to talk a little bit about is actually one of the presentations I'm more excited for, which is kind of paddling in October in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. The reason I considered doing this presentation now versus, at least I don't know if maybe Cliff and a lot like Kevin Callan, a lot of those guys that normally do paddling presentations in the spring and summer probably have done a rendition of this or something along the lines, but I thought about doing this presentation right now, at least this point, because of two things. One, obviously everybody knows the huge amount of influx of tourists and paddlers that went into the Boundary Waters this summer due to the pandemic. And in the summer you could barely even get a permit. And there was just no way to get away from people at all. So it made it difficult for a lot of folks to kind of get what they desired out of their trip just because of the nature of what was happening. And so it forced a lot of paddlers, both new and experienced, to expand their horizons as far as when they took the trip. And the nice thing about doing a fall trip is that post October 1st, if you didn't know, you do not need to pay for a permit. You still need to self-issue a permit, but there's no quota for the amount of permits that go out, just because it's a kind of a shifting and changing time of the year. So it's a little bit tougher to kind of work with the weather a little bit, and you have to kind of be a little bit more on your toes. And we saw a number of folks having to be rescued, for lack of a better term, or escorted out of the Boundary Waters this summer for a variety of different reasons. But most recently, and in fact, the most recent trip I took, which was right at just before that first snowstorm that we had, there was that one gentleman who had to be rescued off the Nina Moose area, which was ironically about 6 lakes south of where we were, and we were still on day 3 of a 6-day paddle when that first snowfall hit the Boundary Waters area. And it got me thinking that for a lot of folks, both new and experienced paddlers, if you haven't done a fall, or for that matter, an early spring trip, I thought it would be good to kind of go over some of the things to think about and some of the differences between what you'd expect and what you plan for a normal summer trip, and then how that shifts and changes into what you'd expect or what you'd be planning for both a fall trip as well as an early spring trip. Because a lot of these things that I'm going to talk about can be applied to early spring trips. Now, the only difference there is obviously with the fall trip, you kind of have to figure out exactly when the ice might be coming in, because you don't want to get locked, iced into a lake, which I'll go over that. We actually had to deal with that on our trip recently. Whereas a spring trip, you don't have to worry too much about being iced in. You may have to deal with ice, but because the climate is warming up a little bit more, you don't necessarily have to worry about getting locked in with ice. So this presentation is basically going to be, as it says right there on the screen in front of you, what to know in order to plan and execute a fall paddling trip, and what not to do. I think a lot of folks that are maybe thinking about their first October paddling trip or first fall paddling trip, even if you go in the midst of the first parts of November, because you still get warm spells every now and then in November. A lot of folks don't know exactly how to handle that, because maybe their primary experience has, and not because they are ignorant or anything like that, it's just because their primary experience in the Boundary Waters has been mainly during the height of the season, which is in the middle of, end of June, July, first part of August, when most everybody ends up going out there, because you're looking at, doing fishing trips, things like that. There's not a lot of folks, except for maybe, at least in years past, for those kind of more experienced paddlers that have done fall trips before, that go out during the October or in the other part of the season, which is early spring, there's also not a lot of folks that go out in early May. Because once again, you don't need a permit in May. Well, actually, you do need a permit in May, starting about the middle of May. So basically, I said tonight is going to be, or today, I should say, because we upped this to 2:45. This position is going to be focusing primarily on what to know and how to plan and execute an October fall trip and what not to do. So what I'm going to be doing throughout this is I'll be moving my Zoom screen back and forth so I can both work the presentation as well as you guys can still see me, because I think a lot of times it's tough to hear me talk and not be able to see me, but also I want you guys to see the screen. So I'm going to move myself over, and I'm just going to go here, and then I'm going to move myself back, just like that. Boom. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. So there's a couple things to think about when you're looking at an October paddling trip, and it's very different. And I want to emphasize that it's very, very different than executing a summer paddling trip. The biggest things is, and of course this is an obvious one, is that there's unpredictable changes in weather. Unlike, and weather, I'm meaning climate weather, not so much like storms and things like that, because when you go into a summer trip, obviously there's a chance you might encounter a severe thunderstorm or high winds or things like that. And that's same type of mindset, but almost in a different category, because you're not going to, I shouldn't say you're not going to, but generally you're not going to have tornadoes coming in the middle of October. But you're also not going to have your 85-degree humid days like you normally would in July. And so there are, and especially with the changes of seasons, this is true with spring as well, because whereas spring you're getting into warmer months, there might be times where you may have an opportunity where you're planning a trip and 3 days before you get there, the ice just went out. I had that happen on a student-led trip where I took students out in 2012, where the ice didn't get actually off the lakes until 3 days before we got up there. And it was a quite different experience than what I had with other groups of students in previous years. And so in these shoulder seasons, when you have kind of the changes in climate where the weather's a bit more unpredictable, you have to be mindful of that. And that also then translates into the possibility of ice in bays and shores. I mean, we get, especially in the fall, not so much in the spring, but in the fall, you get those real cold days, where it's consistently right around freezing or just below freezing. And by the time you're done with a 5 or 6 day trip, where you maybe have encountered a little bit of ice, just that real thin shelf ice you can break with your paddle. By the time you get done with your 6 day trip, if you've had, 30 to 35 degree days consistently, or even below that, you're going to have ice on, especially bays going into a portage or on the shore of a river. I saw that consistently this last October. There's a huge significant difference in the equipment you're needed for a fall paddling trip. It's entirely different. I'm not bringing my chacos like I normally do. I'm not bringing my swimsuit. I'm not bringing my hammock. There's a lot of things I don't bring, but there's also things I do bring. So I'll go over those specifically. There's also a different mindset in the planning and execution. When you're planning a summer body waters trip, obviously it's important to be mindful of the weather. You want to know what the forecast looks like. You want to know, okay, is it going to rain? Is it going to possibility of storms? What's the humidity going to look like? And always keeping in mind that way. There is a similar mindset, but also different when you're looking at the planning execution of a fall trip. You have to be really mindful. Okay, well, is the forecast telling me that it's going to be consistently 25 degrees or below freezing the entire time out on the trip? That's going to be at least the equipment I'm planning for. I may have to adjust that if one forecast tells me, 3 weeks before my trip that it's going to be 45 degrees and sunny for the majority of my trip. And I plan for that initially, but then when I get to a week before my trip, it's telling me, okay, now it's changed. And I'm looking at, 30 degrees or below freezing and snow possibly the entire rest of my trip. So I have to adjust my equipment. So it's a very different mindset as far as constantly being on top of the planning and the execution with the planning before you even leave. The positives, though, there's a ton of positives. There's no bugs. It's probably one of the biggest positives I think of a fall trip is all the bugs are gone. There's no mosquitoes, there's no black flies, there's no no-see-ums, there's no ticks for the most part. There can occasionally be ticks if they've lasted through, if we've had it season be warm. fall, but for the most part, bugs are gone. Cooler temps. So you don't necessarily have to worry about being so gosh darn hot when you're trying to lay in your sleeping bag at night like you would in the middle of July when it's ungodly humid. Most of the temperatures consistently in October or fall trip are right around 35 to 40 degrees on average. Like this year was an anomaly where you have that really early cold front that comes through, and we had that snowstorm that happened first part or middle of October. But you do, for the most part, get relatively cooler temperatures. And as I mentioned, although this might change depending on what happens, as we saw this last fall, is that there's way more less people. The the idea of having to deal with so many different uh, things to be thinking about, cold weather temps, ice on bays, having to cut firewood every single night, staying warm. Do I have the right sleeping bag? Is it going to snow? Is it going to rain? Is it going to sleet? All those other things tend to deter people away from a fall boundary waters trip. And so you generally have less people, which provides more solitude, which is the whole idea behind a boundary waters trip in the first place, is to get away from everything. It's not to be going from one busy hustle and bustle form of life to another where you're constantly seeing people. And I think both early and that tends to work well with both sides of the season, is you have less people in the spring and more solitude as well as in the fall. So I personally, although this year was different, I personally tend to take most of my trips in the early spring or the late fall. One, because I generally don't have to worry about permits. But two, there's less people. I still take a summer trip, usually in August after the bugs are gone, just because I can do a lot more fishing then. I have occasionally taken June trips too, but most of my trips are on the shoulder seasons. And I'll be gone for 6 to 8 days. Any one of those trips doesn't matter. So let's go through each one of these kind of individually. Dang it. No, hold on. I screwed that up. Move this over and bring this back up. And we're going to go back. All right. So the first thing, and I'll put myself over here. The first thing is weather. Weather gets really feisty. She can really keep you on your toes for a number of different reasons. If you do have a storm that comes through, much like we've experienced a lot in a lot of our winters, the storms, if they do come through, are not your typical summer storm. So if you do have a thunderstorm, not a snowstorm, but a thunderstorm come through in the fall, it can produce a lot of really nasty, in some cases, if you're not prepared well enough, life-threatening weather conditions. If it's right around freezing and it's raining or sleeting and you've got thunderstorms, so it's dumping a ton of rain or sleet on you, but it's not snow, which means it's not evaporating fast. You could, if you're not prepared for that, you could have some serious issues. Decreasing temperatures is along with that. They are enjoyable. It's nice to be out in cooler temps because you can utilize a little bit more of your gear, especially if you're a winter guy or winter person. That down jacket, you get to use your rain gear more often, but they can also be life-threatening if not taken seriously. You have to have the right gear, much like a regular cold winter camping trip, which that one is, I kind of put in the category of a summer trip, not because the weather is the same, but the weather's a bit more predictable. If I go into the boundary waters in the middle of January, for the most part, about 85-90% of the time, I'm pretty much guaranteed to know what the weather is going to be like. Like if a snowstorm comes through, it's going to be a snowstorm. It's not going to be sleet or rain or things like that in a typical winter. Of course, our winters haven't been very typical lately. But when you get into a fall trip, because it's so much kind of right around that middle part, right around freezing temperature, you really have to be keen on what it's like out in the day. And so drying your clothes if they get wet, having backups to your backups, all those different things. Snow and frost. One of the things I always say to folks that ask me about fall trips is always expect snow. Never expect it to not snow. So if you go, and that goes back to this different mindset, if you expect your fall trip to include snow, it will drastically improve your ability to plan and execute a fall trip. there will be frost on everything, at least one of the mornings, if not more than one. And so when you're setting stuff out, if you're utilizing the sun to heat up your stuff and dry it out a little bit, which we did a little bit of on our trip, that's good, but don't leave it out overnight because frost is inevitable. And you don't want to have frost on your Gore-Tex jackets or your pants or your boots. Bring your boots inside, believe it or not, wear your wet socks or your damp socks to bed, or shove them in the bottom of your bag to dry them out. So always expect frost at least most of the mornings, if not all the mornings. With that too, the amount of sun that you're going to get, at least on a clear day, is going to be extremely limited. You're going to have a lot more cloud cover than you would expect during a summer PAL. And so using the heat from the sun to dry your stuff out is not going to be an option. You may get the off chance that you have a clear morning, which we did twice. It didn't last very long, it lasted about an hour. So you don't have a lot of time to be able to utilize the sun to dry out anything. And I'll go over how to still dry out your stuff without the sun, but just be aware that you're going to have a consistent cloud cover pretty much almost every single day on a normal average fall. Wet conditions, fall is always ripe with wetness. And so you kind of have to embrace the wet. The whole idea, and this is not just on portages, but just in general. If it snows and you're portaging a canoe, you're going to be knocking snow off the branches, and so it's going to drop down, and you're going to be trudging through snow. And then when you get and as your body warms up and your feet warm up, they're going to melt the snow and everything's going to evaporate. Just expect to be wet, and at least for the majority of it, and know how to adjust and dry out your gear with that. So make sure to accommodate the fact that you're going to be getting wet. There's not really an option to be able to hop from rock to rock on a portage because the possibility of it being covered in ice. So you have to go with the mentality that, okay, I'm just going to be trudging through any sort of water, puddles, things like that. I would also highly encourage anyone to bring a weather radio or a version of an up-to-date weather app that does not require wireless coverage. So utilizing your cell phone, if you normally use a cell phone to look up the NOAA app or weather.com or whatever, that's not going to work. So either a real basic weather radio that you can get at anywhere for like 40 or 50 bucks, or if you have a Garmin or an old DeLorme, there's options for weather forecasts that you can have on that app. But you don't want to utilize your cell phone because you're not going to get coverage. And so you need to bring something that's going to give you up-to-date weather information, because again, you may be looking the day before you enter, the night you get up there, and the forecast says this, and because of the unpredictability of the weather, it may change 2 days into your trip. You may expect, okay, I'm going to have 4 days of relatively calm, cloudy weather, and then a storm is supposed to hit my 5th day that I'm out there. That could change. You might expect all of a sudden, okay, I'm in there 2 days, and bam, that storm's coming faster than you expected, and now you're in a storm you didn't expect. So having a weather radio and being up to date with the weather is extremely important as well. And like I said, weather radios are cheap. They don't require a subscription, and it's really easy to get one. All right, let me make sure I do this correctly again here. I'm going to move myself off to the side again, and we'll go to the next slide, and I'll move myself back. Oh man, this works so well. So actually, before I do that, so here's examples of dealing with ice. So you can see these are actually photos that I took this last October. I shouldn't say I took, my girlfriend Rhonda took, of us breaking through ice, having to deal with ice. The top one is I'm in the stern. I'm actually breaking through ice that we experienced on one of the little creeks that we were on in the stern of the boat. This was actually that 3rd day when that guy got rescued off of Nina Moose. We were actually breaking through a little bit of ice on the creek we were on. The bottom photo down here is on our last day when we were heading out. We actually had, there was a point in which there was this big beaver pond, one of the biggest beaver dams I've seen that's been out there. It was humongous. It was stretched for quite a while. Had basically washed out a good chunk of the portage. And it was a part where you actually, in a normal summer month, you actually had to get in your canoe and paddle along with your gear and then get back out again. We were lucky enough at one point, because at one point we actually were breaking through the ice, and then we realized, oh wait, we can actually line our canoe along the side of this thing. And so this is actually me lining our boat on the ice alongside of it, just walking along the side of this beaver dam. So you're gonna have to deal with ice. It's almost inevitable. I say almost because it's not always gonna be possible, or I shouldn't say you're not always gonna encounter it like every single time, but it's definitely a possibility. So what I recommend to folks, if you have, your prized Sanborn or Whiskey Jack, or, like I personally use an old, North Star Voodoo with the carbon fiber blade. On a fall trip, I am not bringing my most prized paddle, because I guarantee you I'm gonna be breaking through ice, and I do not want to put chips in my nice paddle. Ironically, the paddle that I use as a not nice paddle is an old Gloru Designs blade that I got, that you see me holding in that top photo there. That worked out great, but I didn't bring my best paddle because there's a good chance, especially if I have to break through ice, that it's going to get ruined. And so I bring a relatively sturdy paddle that I'm okay with getting chipped, or believe it or not, I go with like a heavy, dense, solid piece of wood paddle, or I just bring the aluminum plastic blade paddle. Because those I could just break through ice. They're heavy, they're dense, they're going to break through a lot more ice than normal. In this case, in this trip, I didn't bring that one. But if I had done it over again, would I have brought that one? Maybe. But what's funny is that, like, I was able to break through the ice here, no problem. And for the first couple of feet into the bays, when we approached portages on the last day, I was able to break through a lot of the ice with my paddle. But that second point of bringing it, make sure, one, you're going to want to bring a hatchet just to be able to split wood in camp, but you're going to want to have it handy in the canoe. In our trip, I actually had to break through the ice to get to the portage with the hatchet, because the ice was just too thick. It was, by the time we left, having a consistent day, and we knew this, like I said, we prepared for it, but we had about 2.5, 3-inch thick ice getting up to one of the portages. And so I had to break through it with the hatchet. And so having that handy and having it in the canoe, not just handy in camp to make firewood, but having it handy in the canoe in case you have to break through the ice, is a key tip for anyone planning a trip where you might encounter ice. If you haven't gotten cord or lining cord for the bow and stern of your boat, and you're considering a fall trip, I would highly recommend getting cord to be able to line your boat. But if you notice, like I said, on the one down here where I'm lining, we actually had cord. This is my girlfriend Rhonda's boat. But we had cord that we could utilize to be able to line the boat in both the bow and the stern. So I could pull it and she could guide it. Now in this case, she wasn't guiding it because she was busy taking a photo, but I was just pulling it alongside. And so utilizing those lining cords to my advantage to be able to pull that boat across the ice is huge. And don't rush yourself too if you need to break through the ice. When we were doing it, I wouldn't say we were in a rush. I was kind of in a rush just because it had been consistently cold every single day and I was just ready to get back to the truck. But if you have to break through the ice, don't rush yourself at all. Take your time, get the boat up, break through it, have your stern part. If you're in the bow, if you're in the stern, you're in charge of kind of breaking a little bit more of the ice in the sides with your hatchet, or by that time you could probably break it with your paddle to make it wide enough for your boat. But take your time, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to increase your heart rate and sweat a lot, because as soon as you're done breaking through the ice, you get to the portage, or when you get to the other side of the portage and you're back in the boat and you're not actively, you're just sitting and just paddling. If you've increased a lot of sweat, you're going to get cold really quick. And so if you need to break through the ice, just stay calm. It's going to take a while, and just accept the fact that it's going to take a while. For one section, I don't know if I put a photo in this presentation or not, but for the one section we had, it took us almost an hour to just break through the ice to get to the portage. So just accept the fact it's going to take a while. All right. changing in climate and adapting your equipment. It's really important. I'm just going to put this right above me, although there I am, nice and cool and collected next to a river. Because the weather and the climate changes consistently, you have to be on top of adapting your equipment. And what I mean by that is having a quiver of equipment that's going to be able to handle multitude of different changes in climate. So for example, footwear is going to be a priority when you're going into cold weather trips. Whereas you might bring just like a lightweight pair of Gore-Tex boots or even non-Gore-Tex boots because they're just going to get wet for your summer trips. That unless you couple it with solid neoprene socks, is not really going to work with a fall trip. I highly recommend anyone to get one of two things. And the one I recommend out here was neoprene or fully waterproof insulated footwear. There's one that's not necessarily insulated, but it's fully waterproof. Is like just your not galoshes, but actual muck boots or bogs, but something that's going to be fully waterproof that is also significantly insulative, and that you can couple with wool socks and neoprene socks. The footwear I wore on our most latest October trip was I had a pair of lightweight mid-weight hiker crews from Fitz as my base sock. Then I threw on a thicker pair of smart wools that were ski socks that went all the way up to my knee. And then I had my neoprene sealskin socks on. Then on top, over the top of that was my Chota mucklucks, which unfortunately are not being made anymore. But NRS we sell them here at the shop at Midwest Mountaineering. That is the boundary shoe or the boundary boot from NRS is basically the exact same thing with a few minor modifications to the Chota muckluck. So something that's a neoprene with a rubber sole and a rubber kind of up around the ankle is a huge must as far as footwear. And then coupling that with neoprene and heavy to midweight wool socks. So if you think about my footwear, I've got 4 layers. I've got a mid layer, I've got a heavier layer, I've got a really heavy layer with the neoprene socks, and then I have my neoprene boots. And because I know my feet are going to get wet, and so I want something that's going to be waterproof, which the neoprene boots do. I have something that is neoprene and waterproof on the inside of that in case water does somehow get inside my boot. And then I also have 2 layers of wool socks to help wick away moisture as my feet get warm, as well as provide a bit of insulation even if the socks get wet. And my socks do get wet. So expect cold weather no matter what. So produce or basically plan out your layering system as if it were 20 degrees or lower. You don't have to necessarily go to worry about 10 degrees, although that possibly can happen. But the lowest temperature you're probably going to get for the majority of October is 20 degrees. You're not really going to find anything too lower than that with a few rare anomalies. But layer as if we're going to be 20 degrees. And so my layering system consisted of a base layer, which was a long sleeve. I didn't bother with short sleeves because even with a long sleeve, if it's abnormally warm out, I could just roll up those sleeves. But then if it's cold out, I have a full long sleeve setup to keep me warm. A mid layer, which in this case was an R1 hoodie from Patagonia, but anything along with that will work. Then I had a synthetic insulative jacket, which in this case was a nano hoodie or something like that from Patagonia. And then on top of that, if it was right around maybe 30, 35 degrees, I threw on top of that just my Gore-Tex shell. And I did the same setup on my lower half. I had base layer, and then I had a mid layer, which was almost a quasi windproof pair of pants. The Marmot Screes are great. Mammut makes a number of pants like that. Mount Harbor, I believe, still makes pants like that, but you're not going to want to wear your fast drying nylon pants you wear in the summer. It's not, because you're going to be wearing your rain shell bottoms almost consistently. And so you're not going to need something that's fast drying, but you want something that's going to provide a bit of extra insulation and wind protection. So that was basically my setup. And then I did also have a big puffy. I say big puffy. My puffy's not super ginormous, but I didn't bring my massive grade 7 parka that I got from Patagonia. It's a little bit downgraded from that, but a puffy that I could throw on top of my everything else except for my Gore-Tex jacket. I could throw on in camp if I needed to. Now my Gore-Tex jacket that I was wearing is big enough that I could throw my puffy on underneath that if I needed to, but generally I throw my puffy on over the top of everything, unless it's snowing. Then I leave my puffy out because the snow is generally going to mean that it's right above freezing or right around freezing. And my nano hoodie coupled with everything else and my Gore-Tex jacket is going to be just fine. Hats and gloves and mittens, or excuse me, have gloves and mittens, both. Don't just expect, okay, I have one pair of waterproof gloves or one pair of waterproof mittens and that's going to solve all my problems. It's not. Waterproof is only waterproof for a certain amount of time. Once any sort of, because eventually your hands are going to perspire and you're going to get them wet. The sealskin, what used to be called a dragon eye glove, I think it's called the all-weather glove now that I have that's 100% waterproof, ended up getting soaked. And I knew that because I'd used it before. And so I actually had 3 pairs of gloves and 2 pairs of mittens with me on my trip. And they're all varying different degrees. So I had a pair of liner gloves, I had my waterproof gloves, I had a pair of cloud veil gloves for in camp, and then I had a pair of lightweight mittens, and I had my heavy mercury mittens from Black Diamond. So I had the wide range, again, expecting that it's going to possibly be 20 degrees out. And my mercury mittens that I wear from Black Diamond are what I wear when it's negative 15 degrees out when I'm ice climbing. And so I had everything. And I didn't even use the mercury mitts until the very last day because I knew we were going to be going to the truck. Otherwise, those are my dedicated warm weather mitts that I only use when I'm in camp. Because at that point, when I'm in camp, once the firewood's been made and I'm done with everything, I'm just sitting around cooking food. And so I needed something to keep me a little bit warmer. But you have to bring more than one. Don't limit yourself to just one set of gloves or one set of mittens. You have to have backups to your backups, as I say right there. As I mentioned before, you're going to utilize your rain gear more than you would during a summer trip. If it rains out, you might throw in your rain jacket in the summer, and then the next day it's sunny out and you can dry things off. Or you have those little kind of spotty rain patches where it rains a little bit and then the sun comes out and everything dries off again. In the fall, it's not like that at all. It's consistent wetness and rainness, and also possibly consistently snow. I mean, we had snow every day that we were out there this year for a 6-day trip. And so you have to have solid rain gear. And I hate to say this, but the typical rain gear that you might use in the summer, like your normal, like Marmot Precip 2.5 layer lightweight rain jacket, it may keep the snow and rain off you, but it's not going to provide any wind protection, at least not that much. And I say that from experience. I had an old Merrell jacket that was 2.5 layers that I tried out in an October trip, and it didn't work great at all. So now, even though it's the most expensive out there, I have an Outdoor Research, and I also have a Terex, but I have an Outdoor Research top and bottom that I use that is Gore-Tex Pro Shell. And that provides, it's a full 3-layer heavy duty set of rain gear. I've got both rain and waterproof protection, and it's been tested, and I know this from years and years of experience using it, but also it provides a significant amount of wind protection. When you're out in the middle of a lake and that wind's howling, you need some solid wind protection. And even though it doesn't have Gore Windstopper in it, that Gore-Tex shell provides a significant amount of wind protection, coupled with everything else that I have on. And I mentioned this before, but have backups and dedicated dry gear that is never used unless you're in need of an emergency. I mean, emergency meaning you went into the water neck deep and you are soaking wet, emergency. So and Eli, who was with me on my Order Minnesota presentation, he kind of coined this term. I have dedicated sacred stuff, and the sacred socks, sacred long underwear top, sacred long underwear bottom, sacred pair of long merino wool underwear, everything that I consider sacred, along with one extra mid layer that I normally never wear, that is either only going to be used when I'm in my sleeping bag, or in case of an emergency where I have to get dry really quick. So when I go to sleep, you ask, okay, what do you wear when you go to bed? Well, if my regular clothes that I'm wearing during the day aren't soaked to the brim, I just go to sleep in that. I just roll up. I don't even take my I just take my shell off. I take my shell off, my pants and my long underwear, everything else I'm wearing except maybe my big puffy, all go in my 0-degree bag with me, because the body heat I'm generating as I sleep is actually going to allow the evaporation from that dampness, if there is any, to escape out the bag. And so I've actually had a lot of experience where I'm just drying stuff out as I'm sleeping. So rarely did I even have, I never, like this last trip, even though there was a point at which on the last day that I went hip deep into water, I didn't have to touch any of my dry gear. But if I had to, I knew it was there and I knew I could utilize it. So you're having a dedicated set of dry gear, regardless of what, unless you need to use it in the case of an emergency. An emergency meaning you go neck deep and you're trying to stay warm. At that point, if you get the dry gear and you can't stay warm, maybe in your sleeping bag, that's when you use the next thing on the list, which is a Spot or a Garmin unit. And I'm not knocking on the guy who had to get rescued, but there's a point at which where people need to know exactly when to use that. A lot of times, if you're planning properly ahead of time with your gear and the mindset and everything else that you're doing for a fall trip, knowing that the climate can change drastically both directions, you should not have to use your Spot or your Garmin unit in an emergency situation. The only time you should really have to use that is in a circumstance that you did not foresee. What I mean by that is, and this is where it gets kind of a sticky wicket, because, okay, well, I might foresee some things that somebody else who maybe is planning their very first October trip didn't foresee. And so they didn't foresee something that I will expect should they use the Spot in that instance. And I think the more experience you get, the more you're going to realize what you can plan for. But when do you use a Spot or a Garmin unit is when your life is being threatened. If you are relatively uncomfortable, if it's cold out and you're cold, or if you're in your sleeping bag and you're a little bit chilly and that's not a time to turn on your Spot or turn your Garmin unit and press the SOS beacon. The SOS beacon is used as if you physically cannot get yourself out of there and you will possibly die. That's when that's supposed to be being used. And so a number of different times, like going back to ice in bays and things like that, if you cannot get yourself out, if the ice is so thick that even the hatchet is not allowing you to get out, but if it's that thick, you might as well just walk on the ice, which means you can still get out. If you're getting cold and you're just sitting, now again, this is easy for me to talk about this when I'm in a nice warm conference room with the Northern Lights behind me. But having experienced this, I mean, the last day that we were in there, we were breaking through the ice and we have an approaching giant snowstorm. And I went hip deep into the lake and my whole lower body is soaking wet. And we're still having to break through ice and my feet are getting super cold. Did I ever consider hitting the SOS beacon on my Garmin or my DeLorme and my girlfriend hit the Spot or the button on her Spot? No, because we knew A, we were getting to the truck, and B, as long as we kept moving, we were going to get to the truck eventually. And as long as we kept moving, we were going to generate enough body heat to stay warm. So that's where, but you need to bring one. This is something I would emphasize. You have to have some sort of SOS beacon or device that will allow you to get rescued if you need to. And I say absolutely need to. Cell phone, I mean, you can bring it, take photos, but I don't even use that because I don't trust the fact that it might have a signal. So don't even bother with it. But bring something that's got a satellite communication. Yeah, it's expensive, but how much is your life worth if you need to get rescued? So, but there again, I reiterate this, that proper planning ahead of time and thinking about all the possibilities that could happen on the trip will alleviate the need to have to hit that beacon. And as I mentioned before earlier, having access to your hatchet, make sure you bring one, is important because you may need that, especially for the bow paddler to break through the ice. So you have to adapt your equipment. Normally in a summer trip, I would never use my hatchet in the boat. Why would I ever need to do that? It doesn't make any sense. But in the fall trip, you better expect that hatchet is in the front pocket of my pack, easily accessible. in case I have to hit ice. And I will tell you that you never know when you're going to hit ice. When we left our campsite on the last morning, we didn't expect to hit ice, didn't expect it at all. And sure enough, we get to the portage and we're having to break through ice. So always have it handy in the boat, no matter where you are on your trip. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right. So we're kind of continuing on with equipment. So again, I'm going to move myself around, but right here, I mean, you can see we adapted our equipment. I mean, this top one here, that was our second or third morning. That was the day where I think it was our second morning, because that second day it had been snowing and it was kind of wind was going pretty good. It was kind of a crappy day. We were both like that evening, we didn't even eat. We just went to sleep because we were so exhausted and so tired. We did eat, but we didn't make any food. And so the morning we had this gorgeous sunshine and it kind of dried everything out, and we kind of laid some stuff out. We utilized that sunshine, but you can see, I mean, there's a significant amount of snow on here. And the one below it, I mean, I believe that's that day or the day after. I mean, we had consistent snow and it stayed. It didn't warm up and disappear. We only had sunlight for maybe an hour or two in the mornings we were out, and that was it. So it can be almost straight winter while you're out there. So one of the things a lot of people ask me when we're talking about food, talking about any sort of body weight trip, is what kind of food do you take? And I highly recommend, even though it's heavier, you're taking more gear, you want to focus on food that's going to be stuff that sticks to your ribs. Really heavy, fatty, like I said, you're almost planning a winter trip at this point. So, your bacon, meat stuff, chili. If you're looking at dehydrated food, stuff that's got, just stuff that you feel like you need almost like an after Thanksgiving nap when you're done eating your food. That's the kind of food you want to be bringing. The lightweight, like pastas, are great because pastas just stick to stuff. That's the kind of food you want to bring. And in many cases, the fresher, the better. So like I brought 2 packs of fresh bacon on this trip. We had giant steaks and lobster the first night. I mean, we stuck with really solid, hearty food. And you also want to take drinks that are both going to be hot and warm that will also hydrate you. So, coffee, I love coffee. I'm a coffee guru. Coffee every morning for me all the time. However, I have most recently discovered chai tea in the morning. But again, both of those I'm mixing with water, hot water. And one thing that I always bring, although I didn't bring with me on this trip, but I always bring is hot Jello. Hot Jello is by far one of my favorite cold weather drinks out there. Basically, you just get Jello packets and you heat it up like you normally would, but instead of putting it in the refrigerator or in the cool temperatures to solidify, you just drink it when it's hot. And man, it's got all the calories and all the sugar and everything else you want. Plus it's warm, plus it's got water in it. And it's a perfect way to either do like a midday drink or an early morning drink. I've even done it in the evening, but not very often. But man, hot Jello, or basically any sort of drink that is going to be warm and that includes water, is what you're going to want. Also, just having heat bombs. So taking boiling water and putting it, and this is great if you're doing a fire, you just heat up that water over a fire, throw it in your Nalgene in the evening, and throw it into your sleeping bag at night. The water doesn't freeze, so you have water to drink in the morning. That's also warm. But 2, it generates enough heat to basically create a heater in your sleeping bag. And that way you've got water throughout the night you can drink, but also you've got water in the morning if you don't drink it all. So that's another huge tip, is heat bombs. One thing to expect, which kind of translates to the other gear that I don't really bring, is that the time spent you're going to be in camp is going to be primarily gathering things to stay warm and possibly drying your items out. So you don't need to worry about bringing unnecessary items that you're going to be hanging out in camp for. So normally, yeah, I bring a hammock when I go summer camping. Don't bother with it in the fall. Because chances are by the time I get to camp, because the days are shorter, so nights are coming in faster, I'm not going to have time to just hang out in a hammock and read a book. It's going to be so cold and the wind's going to be howling. I'm not going to want to be in that hammock in the first place. A lot of my other stuff, like things I might bring just for like in camp games and stuff, I don't really worry about that. I bring a journal to write the events down. I always bring a journal, and I bring a book, and that's it. That's all I bring: book and a journal. Books are great because they'll still last even if they get a little bit wet. But they're great to whether it's warm enough where you want to sit outside next to the fire, or whether you're inside in your tent. Either way, a book is great. And the journal is always great because you recount everything you see. But those other unnecessaries, again, you're going to be experiencing a lot of cool stuff. A camera is a must-have. Even if you're bringing your phone, I still bring a backup Nikon everything but lose-proof camera. But those other things you might bring in the summer, I won't worry about it. This year, although it can differ from year to year, this year I did bring my fishing pole and my lures and stuff. In retrospect, would I have brought that again, being able to do it over again? Probably not. We tried fishing that, I think it was the second or third morning, and didn't get any bites at all on anything. And I wouldn't I mean, you can if you're big into fishing, you want to do some fall fishing. There's definitely things that fish will eat, and you'll still catch fish. But just with everything, and because of how cold we knew it was going to be, sitting a boat and just casting a line really wasn't something that we wanted to deal with. So at least on my next fall trip, I'm at least that late in October, I'm probably not going to bring my fishing pole again. I highly recommend a 4-season tent, something that's single walled. The tent that I normally bring in the spring and summer, which is a MSR Hubba Hubba, or at least the older version, not the new one, that has mostly screen with a rainfly. That's not going to work. And you can see the tent we brought up in that top corner up here. This one is a Mount Harbor 4-season, almost a mountaineering tent with a full rainfly and vestibule. That thing was fantastic. It was almost consistently 20 to 30 degrees warmer in the tent than it was outside. And so having a single wall or a significant something that's listed as a 4-season tent is going to be much better than trying to finagle and work with a 3-season or a 2-season tent. You need to bring a 0-degree bag or lower with an inflatable pad. And also your sleeping bag needs to have at least a waterproof shell or have treated down if you're bringing a down bag. So waterproof shell, Western Mountaineering bags, Mount Harbor down bags, Marmot has their treated down stuff that also has a waterproof shell. Anything, if you're doing down, Western Mountaineering is probably the best, but they're expensive. But anything that's going to be 0 degrees or lower and rating, and I highly recommend going with down over synthetic. Down just because it's gonna loft better. It's gonna keep you warmer at night. There was a couple times that, my bag condensed a little bit and got a little bit wet on the outside shell, but my down was never wet. And all I had to do was when I got to camp, I had to pack it up a couple times. It was a little bit damp. So the first thing I got when we got the tent set up back into camp, I just laid that sucker out, and within a matter of minutes, it was lofted and it was dry. And I was dry and happy and warm when I got in my sleeping bag. So going with a bag that you've utilized in like regular winter camping trips, when you go out mid-January when it's like maybe 10 degrees or maybe negative 10 degrees, a bag you've utilized during that will work great. Because again, if it's a little bit warmer out and you're a little bit warmer, you can either take some layers off or just unzip that and let the air flow a little bit. One thing too is that I did bring Senna with me on this trip, and a lot of people ask, well, how do you deal with dogs? You want to treat dogs the same way we treat yourself, although they've got a little bit of extra layering than you do. Obviously, most of us aren't covered in fur, so we have to mitigate that a little bit. But for Senna, I I didn't, but I have now. A fleece jacket. I had a fleece overtop for her. And then in this case, when she was in the boat, we just wrapped her up in a wool blanket. But know how your dog handles cold temperatures. Because if the temperatures do drop, dogs will get wet. And you want to make sure that you've got both things to help dry them out and keep them warm, but also keep their paws and pads warm. Real quickly before we go to the next one, looks like we have a question here. Are there any classes available to practice cold water submersion? That's a good question. I mean, a lot of my experience has to deal with a lot of my experience as a scout. When I was a younger, older teenager, a lot of things that I experienced with dealing with emergency preparedness and dealing with your break through the ice, how do you get yourself warm, things like that. I did a lot of that or learned a lot of that through my Boy Scouting and Eagle Scouting experience. As far as cold water and cold water submersion, I don't know if there are any classes on that. That's a good thing to ask. I could do some research, but I would just look up and see if there's any organizations, emergency organizations that would offer that. I don't know for sure. I think that's that might be Jonathan Ringdahl who's asking that. Did I have any moisture problems inside my tent? Not really until like the last maybe day or two. The last morning was when it got the coldest, and we had a little bit of condensation that was frozen inside the tent. But you want to have a lot of 4-season tents that are meant for either cold weather camping or mountaineering. Especially if you're planning on hot tenting, that's a different story. Most people aren't planning on hot tenting unless you're skiing and doing a full winter trip. Because with a winter boundary or outdoor October boundary waters trip, you're usually going to be paddling. So most people don't hot tent where they bring a full wood stove and a canvas tent. Most 4-season tents are going to have a ventilation system. And so with that, if you open up all those, knowing like for myself, I'm a hot sleeper. So I generate a lot of moisture vapor when I'm sleeping. Some people don't. I not only will have all the vents open in my tent, and then actually I'll sometimes even open the door a little bit, because again, I'm not worried about bugs getting into the tent. So I'll kind of zip up the top of my door open a little bit to let more of the heat out. But to help mitigate that, I also put a moisture vapor barrier from Western Mountaineering in my bag with me. And what that does, it helps keep the vapor moisture from evaporating too fast out of my bag, which is what causes the condensation in the inside of the tent. That's one recommendation I would bring too. Thank you for the questions. Let's continue on here. I'm going to move myself over again, and then we'll click here. I mentioned earlier that a change in mind is, I'll put something there. A change in mind is required. And the reason I mentioned that is, and this is a term that everybody's heard of before, but Eli kind of utilized it for me recently in a post that was put in. You kind of have to, more than ever, you have to embrace the suck. It's going to be cold. It's going to be wet. You're not going to have your typical normal hangout, with the sun going down, Boundary Waters experience. It's still an awesome time to go, and I highly recommend everybody do it. But there are going to be times where it's going to suck. And so you just embrace the suck and you just keep rolling with it, and don't let it deter your inspiration to get out there and enjoy the Boundary Waters in the fall. And if you do that, anytime you hit a snag or an obstacle, you just overcome it and you just keep going. As I mentioned consistently throughout this presentation, expect cold temperatures. It's going to be colder. Your 75, 80 degree day is not going to be out there unless we have an abnormally warm day like we have had. Expect cold temperatures. Adapt whenever possible. You need to adjust your gear and allow your gear to be adjustable. What I mean by that is, or adaptable too. What I mean by that is that have almost a set of gear, a set of clothes in particular, that are going to be able to work with a variety of different temperatures. So I've got temperatures that'll work with, you know, the 40 to 50, maybe 50, 55 degree days, but I've also got clothing and gear that'll handle it if it gets down to 20. So I've got gear that can handle a 30 to 35 degree difference, regardless of what the temperature is. Stay focused, as I mentioned, don't get down. Always look on the bright side of life, right? If you stay focused on what you're doing and knowing, okay, I've got to get firewood cut, or I've got to get this done, or I've got to get this done, I got tent set up, staying focused on the task and getting each one of those things done and just chipping away at things that need to get done will allow you to stay focused and will not get down. The moment you realize, oh, I'm cold, or I need to find to get wood to get warm, and you just sit down and kind of start feeling sorry for yourself, that's where people start to have problems. And so if you stay focused on a task that need to be done, get done, I have to find firewood, I have to split it, I have to put my tent up, I have to put my tarp up and get my gear underneath that because it's snowing. I gotta get my sleeping bag out, let it dry a little bit. If you stay focused on all those tasks and you get done, which is a way more than you would normally have in a summer trip. There's a lot of other things that you have to worry about, have to be thinking about that may or may not be necessary in the summer. Do you have to have a fire in the summer? No. Is it really nice to have a fire and stay warm in the winter or in the fall trip? Yes. And so there's a different mindset there. So like when we did our trip this last October, every evening we were having a fire. And that was just the goal. Okay, we get to camp, we set the tent, we get the gear out, I'll start looking for firewood, I'll start cutting it up, we'll start splitting it up, and we'll get the fire going because we gotta get the water heating for food. And so we had all these tasks. And if you plan before you go, that makes that process of doing those tasks much, much easier. What you also do is test your gear before you go. If you haven't at least tested most of your gear, if you have, like, for example, if you have an unseasonably cold weekend the week before your trip and you haven't tested your sleeping bag yet, sleep outside. Try it out. If you get cold and you realize, okay, the sleeping bag is not going to work, you can always just go inside your house and realize you have to upgrade your sleeping bag a little bit. So test your gear before you go. And follow the forecast, like I said, prior to your trip, and keep tabs on it all the way up until takeoff. And if you have a weather radio, it's really important to then keep tabs on it during the trip. And the other thing too is, like I said, embrace the suck a little bit. If you look at these are photos that were taken on our trip this last October. Do you look like I'm worried about things and I feel sorry for myself? No, I'm jamming. I've got my dog with me. Things are great. She's loving it. She's having fun. I mean, I'm rocking out. I'm doing things that I would normally do on a normal trip. It's great. And I absolutely love it. So you got to accept that and just stay on the positive side of things. All right. Last but not least, why in the world would you go into the Boundary Waters in the middle of October? And I mentioned this before. There's no bugs. There's cooler temperatures. You really get to enjoy a fire for its pure reasoning, which is keeping people warm. I mean, this picture right here of us, I mean, both these nights, these were two different campsites. I mean, this was a great night. We were out of the wind. We had a fire the whole night. We had just cut a bunch of wood and we're fully stocked. We had a full belly of food and we were just hanging out. And I mean, you look at the bottom there on here, and Cinna's just got her feet on the feet of my girlfriend, just chilling and hanging out. And she's loving the whole thing too, because she was staying warm. Over here in this other photo where I'm literally sitting outside in my Crazy Creek with Cinna's in the bundle right next to me right here. And I'm just writing in my journal outside next to a fire. So you really get to enjoy the true aspects of a fire. It was so quiet out there. There was nobody, which I found somewhat interesting just because of how busy the Boundary Waters had been. But you get so much solitude and so much quiet that it's absolutely amazing. And on top of that, you get to see a lot of wildlife that nobody else really sees. An example of that is 5 out of the 6 days that we were out there, we saw river otters. 5 out of 6 days, we saw river otters more than once. And that's a rarity to even see river otters in the first place in the middle of summer. So to see that and to see amongst other things was just truly amazing. we saw one of the coolest things on the last day, which was awesome, is that we were getting back to the neck of this river, getting out, and we saw there was a couple of trumpeter swans hanging out. We're like, oh, that looks cool. Those are awesome. And then we saw like 20 more coming from the right side, and then 15 more coming from the left side. And at one point, there was a huge flock of geese too, a huge gaggle of geese. And you must have had at least 60 to 70 combination of trumpeter swans and geese all in one spot on this one lake. It was so cool. And I had never experienced that ever before. So it's really awesome to be able to experience all these things. Like I said, things you don't normally see or experience otherwise. Let's see what else do I have on this last one. So yeah, here's a couple more photos from the trip. This was that same night where I had the red light on this one right here, where I'm sitting with red light. That is from that same campsite, getting sitting all bundled up. I mean, it's snowing every day, so the pictures you get are just so cool. And I talk about cloudiness, but man, this is with Rhonda's iPhone, and it was just amazing. Some of the photos she got with the cloud cover and the differences in cloud. It was so awesome. So at this point, if people have questions of things that maybe I didn't cover, I'm going to leave this up. I'm just going to put myself down here. Let me know. We've had a few. If you don't know, I believe it's Jonathan Ringdahl. That's one of the chatters in here. There is a couple. If you do want to get in touch with John, I think he did a presentation on cold weather camping. He does stuff and does a lot with the scouts. And so if you're looking at practicing some cold weather submersion and how to deal with, okay, if I get fully submerged in the water or break through the ice, how do I deal with that, or how do I get through that? I can get you in touch with John. Looks like we're going to do some email tag, and I can get you in touch with him. We're looking at other organizations too. So if you have questions, please feel free to chat. I'm going to type in here in case you guys all have questions. If you want to ask them. Most of the photos you're seeing are of me in the front of the canoe. We switched back and forth every day. So the first day I was in the stern, she was in the bow, and then the second day she was in the stern, I was in the bow, and her photos are way better than mine. My phone is in a Motorola, and the pictures on it are horrible, and even my Nikon camera that I have doesn't take the best photos ever. But her iPhone just took amazing pictures. So yeah, most of the pictures of us are of her taking photos from the stern, but we flipped back and forth. And which is actually, I think, is really cool, having a partner that knows how to canoe from both the bow and the stern. We can flip flop. It kind of switches things up a little bit. You get different views, you see different stuff. You get more of a relaxed paddle if you're in the bow than if you're in the stern, at least that I found. But it's nice to have both those. So if you guys have questions, please feel free to ask. This trip I've taken a number of fall trips before, one of which was actually a staff trip that we took a number of years ago. And I didn't have this much consistent snow year out. But again, the biggest thing I think is if you go with the expectation that you're going to be in a different climate, it's so much easier to deal with everything. All right. Question we have: thoughts on rivers and small lakes versus big lake travel this time of year? I think as far as traveling over them, it's about the same. Like if you're going to be on big lakes like Lac LaCroix, Big Sag, any of those big border lakes, Brule, Seagull Lake, as far as dealing with the wind, you're going to have almost the same mindset. You're going to have to know how to handle wind and know the direction you're going. And it's even more important to do that because if you do flip, it's a drastically a much different experience and having to deal with that than if you flip in the summer. The one thing I would say though is that a lot of times in October, now this isn't always the case, but a lot of times in October, you don't have very many days with the wind being so high. The first day we were out there was extremely windy, but second, third, fourth day, fifth day, I mean, right in the middle of our trip, because it was right around freezing and the snow was falling, we didn't have a lot of days that were super windy. And so we didn't really have to deal too much with the mindset of dealing with wind so much on bigger and small lakes. The one thing I would say though is that big lakes are not going to have nearly as much of the ice to deal with, the potentiality of ice, as small lakes are. And same, well, rivers, it depends on the river. The river we were on didn't have a ton of ice that covered, there was ice on the shore, but there was a solid channel all the way through the middle of the river. We were able to get out. But small lakes particularly are going to have more of a potentiality of icing, especially in those small bays. Big lakes, especially with the wind and choppiness that you might get in a bigger lake like Big Sag, you're not going to have to worry too much about the ice until later into like November. But as far as dealing with wind, that perspective is the same regardless if it's a summer or a fall trip. What are you wearing while paddling? Came in late, sorry if you covered this, that's okay. I do a layered system that's very similar to what I wear in winter. And I'm an ice climber, and so I know I'm going to be active. And so it's the same mentality going into the winter or the fall trip, that you have gear that's going to basically kind of allow you to work with no matter what the climate temperature is in. So personally, I use a merino wool or a capelline if you want to go that route. Long sleeve base layer. I use the same thing, in this case, merino wool base layer on my lower half. Top half, I've got a mid layer, usually like an R1 hoodie from Patagonia or something along those lines that has the gridded fleece pad on the inside. That's what I wear on top of my base layer. On the bottom, I use generally a pair of pants that has a little bit of wind protection. So the Marmot Screed Pant is a great example. Both Martin Hardware and Mammut have made pants like that. Those are great, but something that's going to have a little bit of wind protection. On the top layer, because of my core, I want to keep my core warm. I'll throw on top of the mid layer, that R1 hoodie, I'll throw up a synthetic insulative jacket that's a little bit on the lighter weight side. So like the Nano hoodie, trying to think what the Arc'teryx one is. There's a number of them that are like the Patagonia Nano Air hoodie or something like that, or Nano Puff, same thing. Something that's lightweight, but is going to provide enough insulation. On top of that, and then on my lower half, on top of that wind blocking layer, I have my rain shell or my Gore-Tex layer for both top and bottom. And then I also bring a puffy jacket. Oh, a couple of things I didn't mention earlier is I always bring more than one stocking cap. So I have one that has a liner on a fleece liner on the headband, but then has a breathability on the top. So this one is one of the ones I brought on that trip. I also bring one that's fully fleece and fully wool that I usually wear in camp or in my sleeping bag, because again, I'm not generating enough heat, so the heat isn't evaporating off my head. So I need something that's a little bit warmer. And I always usually wear a buff. Now I have both a synthetic buff like this one, or in this case, this trip, I wore a merino wool buff. So a buff or some sort of face mask, I go with buff because I've been using a number of different things. I can put it over my head like this and go underneath my hat. I can go it over my face. If I do the full head thing like this, I can then bring it up and put it over my face so I have full coverage. So the buff is what I recommend, at least for a neck gaiter. It's so worth it, and it's relatively cheap. Footwear, just because they came in late, I usually wear a mid layer for socks, a heavier weight that goes up to my knee, pair of Smart wool socks on top of that. I then use a pair of neoprene waterproof sealskin socks. And then I have a pair of Chota mucklucks. And again, Chota mucklucks are not being made anymore. So the comparative pair of boots to that are the NRS boundary boots. or you can go with a pair of like muck boots or bogs. Those work as well too. So the next question is, what was your total weight starting out? Oh, to be honest, I don't even think we actually weighed our packs. Because of the extra gear we're carrying, like we've got heavier food. We split up the tent. We split up some of the collective gear. I'm going to say my pack was probably around 55 pounds total. Base weight before food is probably around maybe 40 to 45 pounds. It wasn't a heavy pack. And you can see it right there, that yellow pack. I mean, this was probably maybe day like 3 or 4. I mean, as you eat, you obviously you're going to eat more and more food, so your pack's going to be heavier to begin with and get lighter throughout. But my base weight was right around like probably 45 pounds, and then had about 10 to 15, maybe even 20 pounds of food. So anywhere with total weight, anywhere between starting out was probably between 55 and 65 pounds in the pack. Okay, I saw the next question. Tune in late. What about footwear? Again, I keep reiterating it, so I don't worry about hitting it again. Some of it's going to be insulative. I personally don't wear my muck boots when I'm boundary waters paddling in the fall, just because I like the flexibility of the neoprene. And so the Chota Muckluck or a neoprene NRS boundary boot is great. And then going with a midweight wool sock, a heavyweight wool sock, a neoprene waterproof sock, and then your boot or your muck boot. One other thing I forgot to mention that is also part of the gear that I bring that most people don't think about. And I only wore it a couple of times just because my feet never really got super, super cold. Because normally I don't really, especially right now, because my Chota footwear are meant to keep my feet warm. I don't really worry too much about camp shoes because, again, I'm wearing 100% waterproof insulated boots that go all the way up to my mid calf. I did bring my Western Mountaineering down booties, and that was in the event, again, if water got in my boot and in my socks, and it was super cold out, like way below freezing, like 24 degrees, which actually the morning we left, it had gotten down to like 24 degrees that night. I bring my down booties as a way to keep my feet warm in camp. The great thing about those is that they pack down to next to nothing. I mean, my down booties, when they were packed together, probably about this big. They're down, which is extremely lightweight, and they're immensely insulative, having been down, and they have a rubber bottom, a kind of a scratch, or not scratch resistant, but a very rugged bottom, which allows me to wear them when I'm in camp and not get ruined. So the only time I didn't wear them is if it was kind of right above freezing, but it was raining or sleeting or something like that, because I didn't want them to get wet. Even though they have a waterproof coating, I still didn't want them to get wet. But my down booties were like a lifesaver. I loved those things in camp. Ironically, I never really wore them except for maybe the first day and the second day, because the first day we were out there was actually still sunny and relatively warm. It was in maybe the upper 40s when we first went in. And then it got really cold. Like, I mean, it was a good 10-degree difference from day 1 to day 2. And so that morning or in that night, I wore my down booties. But after that, I mean, my Chota Mucklucks kept my feet pretty warm. Any other questions? We've been going for about an hour, but I don't want to let anybody go without answering any questions. If you guys do want a copy of the presentation and the stuff I have, or even just to ask me for the questions, if you get home, if we're done tonight, you're like, oh crap, I forgot to ask this question. I'll spell out my email. You're more than welcome to email me anytime you want. The email here I have at Midwest is sschreader, SSCHREADER at midwestmtn.com. I'll actually type it in the chat for you guys too, if you want. This is my email for anybody that wants it. I don't know if it'll let me do it, but we'll see. No, it won't let me send a URL. My bad. So again, SSCHREADER@midwestmtn.com. If you want a copy of this petition, or if you want to ask me some further advanced questions, please let me know. Okay, we do have another questions. Did you do 2 trips for each portage, 1 pack, 2 canoe? Yes. What my partner and I found out, and it's interesting because my girlfriend Rhonda, she is primarily a dual portage or a double portage, where she'll bring her pack first, go back and get the boat, bring the boat back. Whereas normally, especially if we're doing solo trips, when I do solo trips, I'm a single portager. I want to get through the portage and get back on my boat. I want to see more stuff. That was earlier this year. Now that we've done a number of trips together, that has changed a little bit. And so we've got a pretty good system now, because we also change up who carries the canoe. So first portage I take, it's like a portage she takes it because she wants to carry the canoe. And I'm like, who am I to say no? I'm not going to say no. And so we both take our packs, in this case, our fishing rods, up the first portage, drop them off, walk back, one of us grabs the boat. We both grab our hip belt packs, where we have all of our kind of fishing stuff and our other day pack accessories and necessities. And one of us takes the canoe and heads off, and then one follows behind. And it worked out pretty well, because in this case, whoever wasn't taking the canoe took the blanket that you see Cindy wrapped up in there, for her kind of wool blanket wrap up. They're the one that grabbed the blanket on the way off. So yes, we did 2 double portage, packs first, and then canoes second. So any other questions from folks? We've got, we'll go till another maybe 3 minutes or so. But again, if you guys have any other questions, or if you want a copy of the presentation, please let me know. If you want to see some video of our trip, this is not a personal plug for my Facebook page, but feel free to look me up on Facebook. There's a lot of posts that my girlfriend did that I'm tagged in, that has video from our trip. And you can see some of the portage we had to walk through, and you'll see where I'm portaging the canoe, and I could care less about the water. I'm not worrying and being all nimbly bimbly and hopping from rock to rock, although there are a few others that are like that. And that was more to show off than anything else. But at some points along the trip, I just am like, you know what? I'm going to hit the water. I'm going to get wet. I'm just going to trudge right through. So thank you guys for coming. Thank you for enjoying this presentation. This presentation will go up on YouTube in about 2 to 3 days. So if you missed anything, or if you came in late, if you want to see some of the stuff that I talked about earlier, I didn't touch on, you're more than welcome to. Feel free, there's more presentations to check out. We've got, I think I'm the last one today, but there's more happening the rest of the week. Tomorrow, I think all the way up until Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So give you plenty of things to watch and to check out, even before we all sit around and eat turkey and watch football games on Thursday. So this is my last presentation for the Fall Expo this year. Hope you guys have enjoyed the presentation so far. We still have a couple more days of the sale going on. There's sales this weekend happening with Prana and Mountain Hardware and Icebreaker. So if you're looking for those base layers, you need to do some fall trips. They're on sale right now. Plus, there might even be some Mountain Hardware sleeping bags on sale too. So definitely come check them out. All those sales happen throughout the week, all the way to Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And one last shout out. I hope you guys all enjoy your Thanksgiving this year. Make sure to stay safe. Enjoy it, make the most of it, but also be safe and be careful out there. Have a great and fantastic Thanksgiving, and we'll see you guys here hopefully around Black Friday.